Powered by Riverside FM.
In the first-person shooter series of the same name, the TimeSplitters are a race of mutant beings, once thought to be extraterrestrial in origin, that pose the greatest threat to mankind. Attacking not with advanced firepower nor political subterfuge, instead they manipulate our very history. Using time crystals as their means of doing so, the TimeSplitters teleport to significant historical events, changing the parameters to ensure our very destruction. Fortunately, their plans always seem to be thwarted by the right man or woman in the right place at the right time. The TimeSplitters franchise could be considered one of those significant historical events. These titles were once the reigning champions of couch competitive first-person shooters, at least before the advent of broadband internet and online matchmaking. They opened the door for player expression and user-generated content in a means not seen beyond the PC space at the time. Yet it seems that both TimeSplitters as a series and the developers responsible have been left to the history books, following the catastrophic failure of their last big title some years later. A historical event that, unfortunately, they haven't been able to rewrite. This is a great shame, considering that, even today, their titles remain timeless, conceptually and mechanically. So, for this new mini-series, we'll be travelling back in time to analyse the games of Nottingham-based Radical Design Ltd. Formed by ex-Rareware staff members who had already made history with the genre-defining GoldenEye 007, they looked to write their own future outside of Rare with titles that expanded what players could get out of the FPS genre. We'll be looking at their astounding beginnings, their unfortunate ends, and perhaps something of a positive epilogue for a studio that made bullet time possible. But even Free Radical had to start somewhere. So, join us on a trip back to the turn of the millennium as we dig into 2000's TimeSplitters. What's the Sega game called that has Rolling Star in it and the guy sings the theme?
Daytona.
Yeah, Daytona USA.
Star. Yeah, that was a Nagoshi joint, wasn't it?
Is that did Nagoshi work on Daytona USA?
He got started in racing games.
That
I can't
sounds
remember if it was explicitly Daytona, but that's where he cut his teeth, and that's kind of why a lot of the driving minigame in Yakuza 5 is the way it is, because it's Nagoshi, and it does have music from Daytona in the minigame, which is pretty fun.
That's pretty good, because I know, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense, because Nagoshi was in the, whatever the AM2, the arcade department, because he worked on Monkey Ball, which is obviously how they got the, well, I told the story on stream the other day, didn't I, which was that they did Monkey Ball, and then they did the conversion for the GameCube, Super Monkey Ball, and
it was Nagoshi trying to make a game as cheaply as possible to prove it could still be done.
Okay, I didn't know that. Element about Monkey Ball.
I appreciate that little bit of trivia, because it was like he wanted to prove a game could still be made incredibly cheaply. So he had this budget where it's going to use one control, it's going to be cheap as chips to make, and then a few years later he goes mad and makes one of the most expensive fucking games that Sega had produced up to that point. He goes like, right, I've proved it can be done on the cheap. Now I'm going to go in the other direction.
Do you think
we're going to 180 this?
Do you think that happens to everybody who works in the arcade department? Because obviously you have Yu Suzuki who does Afterburner and stuff like that. That being said, though, I mean, Outrun is kind of like a weird
I think Sega
Beach Boys
just had and it had a remake in 2006, but I think Sega just had this I got really depressed when I really did some research into kind of Sega's 5 or 6 studios around the turn of the millennium, and they had just so many little studios that were just running weird gaming experiments, which is how you get stuff like, well, not just Monkey Ball, but stuff like Jet Set Radio and all those oddities. And it's like, just a fucking hotbed of creativity. Space Channel 5, fucking Sonic Adventure, going nuts, and, yeah, I don't know any studio that would foot the bill on that much rampant creativity nowadays.
No, I can't imagine any studio that would fund something like Shenmue.
Actually, tragically, God, considering how much I hate the studio, Ubisoft did have a weird period of that, and it still does do a lot of cheap I mean, like, when they had the Ubi Arts kind of push, and they had...
Well, they're doing another Valiant Hearts, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, they are, and they had that climbing game, Grow Home, which I hear a few people talk about as being good. And for a while, when I gave Ubisoft the benefit of the doubt, I was thinking of them like British stage actors who go and do 6 months of Hollywood big movies and then spend the other half of the year doing, like, doing the theatre circuit in the UK, because that's where their passion is. I don't really think that way of them anymore. I think that's way too romantic and ideal.
Yeah, and I think especially now in regards to, like... Although it's weird, like, Ubisoft will occasionally announce something like... Do you remember the roller derby game that they announced, like, 3
yeah, I
years
do.
ago?
I was, like, half tempted to join the beta, and I think I almost did. I got emails about it, and I was like, well, it looks unique. Is it dying? Is it getting shut down?
I don't know. Oh, I don't know if it's like Skull and Bones, which is being, like, rebooted, which...
Well, that game has to come out.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's like the Flashes for Warner Brothers. They just need to just recoup anything on it. They have to put it out.
I mean, it's not just that. I think I've told you the story, but they borrowed money from the Singaporean government, so they legally, literally have to release it. They are bound by government law. The game has to come out. It has government money in it.
That's amazing. Oh, you must.
That's
have
why Skull and Bones just. That's why you could tell no one at Ubisoft actually gives a toss about getting Skull and Bones done, but it has to come out, and that's why it just refuses to die.
And it's so funny as well, because it seemed like they were making it on the, like, how white hot the boat combat was in Assassin's Creed 3. Which
I think that fire has died off.
Oh, yeah, that is long gone. It's like all the people who managed to get their zombie games out long after Left 4 Dead, buried them. But,
yeah, the design trend has died off, and I don't think Skull and Bones is going to be the one to make people go, yeah, pirates. Want pirates back.
You know what Ubisoft should bring back, though?
What should they bring back?
They should bring back the game that we're talking about today. By the way, folks, hi, welcome to Bullet Time, the video game podcast where we analyse the studios that missed their marks. This one didn't, by any means, but some of the future ones that we're going to talk about might, because, folks, we're onto a brand new mini-series. That's right. Following the exploits of Raven Software, we're now hopping across the pond to where I live, and also the special guest host of this series. We're both...
I like the hesitation.
I had to make sure. I was just like, are we both in the UK? Is that right? Is that accurate?
Well, maybe things will go exceptionally wrong in the next few days. With the politicians today, anything could happen.
That's true, yeah. By the time this episode goes out in 2023, when people...
We could be living in a Mad Max world by the time this goes out. I'm not sure how you're going to disseminate the podcast if that happens, but I hope it still goes up, even though I'll be driving a fuel tanker down the M25 under gunfire. It's going to be great. I don't even have a driver's license, so I won't need one.
I imagine it'll be like, because when I was a kid, we used to do school trips and stuff, and they came in two forms when I was in primary school. Either we visited an old mine, which was still active, even though that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because I thought Thatcher closed them all down. Apparently not. Maybe these were like, like pirate radio stations?
Yeah.
Maybe these were like pirate mines, like they were still in operation, but like, couldn't stop them, I guess. But we went to school trips there, but we also did school trips to like recreation villages, like like people like kind of out of work actors and stuff, do it for a couple of days out of the year for tourists and kids. And we went to one which was just slightly outside of Swansea, and it was like done in the style of an old Welsh Celtic village where
Were they speaking Welsh? Was it just utterly incomprehensible to anyone who wasn't in?
some of them they said certain phrases in Welsh like that we were meant to kind of like take on board. Obviously I didn't remember any of that, but then everything else was plain English, but in the thickest Valleys accents that you could manage.
Oh no.
So it would be like, our day today in the village is that we will walk around and we will feed the animals, and then we will do a hunt, and then we will train the boys for hunting. And it's like, oh great, that sounds like God, shame you guys didn't invent the Game Boy back then, because that sounds boring as hell. Not a fan of that.
You had to make do. I've been reading about football hooliganism today, and it's it's originated in the 1300s, where it would be between entire towns, where it was a mob of as many people as you could get, and the aim was to get the ball and kick it at a specific church door in a neighbouring town, using any means possible to stop each other. And I did appreciate the note, people often died in the ensuing brawls. The king had to put a stop to it.
I just like the idea of the king putting a stop to it the same way that like an old woman when you're playing football outside of house just like opens the door and then just goes and just like, what are you doing? Get out of here. But it's like King Charles II just going out of the castle and just being like, get out. What are you doing? Go away.
Our school trips were a lot less... Well, I guess they were more entertaining, but at least yours sound like they had historical value. Ours were just... The teachers would take everyone... This is primary school.
Yeah.
Would take everyone to a soft play area, which when you get a whole lot of kids and put them in a soft play arena, no, that's no longer soft. That's going to be some fucking roughhousing right there.
God.
Or a cinema. And I only remember seeing the first Harry Potter film in a... God, what a waste.
God. I'm just laughing at the idea of them taking you to a soft play area, because that's like the sort of thing that, like, when you go to Asda or, like, IKEA with your parents as a little kid...
Get
and they
dumped there, just
Yeah,
to...
and you can dump them up, but I just like the idea of an entire school being just like... it's just, keep the sprogs busy, just taking to us. Let's take the entire school to a soft play area. And it's just all the teachers are just like at the Morrison's Cafe, just having a smoke and a big breakfast. While the kids are going mad at the soft play area.
So yeah, that's what our schooling was all about. Yours sounded like they were actually trying.
Yeah, no, I suppose so. I told you the story the other day of when I got to secondary school. Well, actually, no, that's not true. There was 2 trips that they did. One was to Walton Towers, which was a bit more affordable, but it was like a 10-hour bus journey there and back. But they also used to do like a skiing trip, which was like aimed exclusively at the upper middle class kids who went to my secondary school. To the extent that when I was in sixth form, so it didn't really affect me, they were like low on cash at this school. And they had to decide whether they were going to keep the skiing trips or cut some arts and drama. And they decided to go with the latter because the kids really liked the skiing holiday.
God,
even
that
though only
is
about
so
fucking
disgustingly
10...
middle class.
Even though only 10 people from the entire school went a fucking... It must have been like a money... what do they call it? Like a money laundering scheme or something?
It's a very weird one to run. I'm just thinking that I can't remember like a single middle class person from either my primary or secondary school or anyone. I guess when you're a kid you're not tuned to that, but I think all my education up to university and even a lot of that was exclusively surrounded by working class people.
Yeah. I suppose it's just kind of the part of the country that you're in. That being said, we did go to mines and stuff, which are like, that's about as working class as you can get, really.
True. Yeah, I can't knock that.
I was about to say, they weren't digging for any... I guess they were digging train tunnels, but that's about it. Not digging for much else. But, mean, I
Just
don't know.
digging to put some rails down, which is a pretty good reason to dig.
That's still pretty impressive, yeah. And if anything, if all the union action is mostly happening, it's all train related as well. So all
Fun
works out.
times. It all comes together.
It is. Well, I'll say what else comes together. Talking about the historical value of these school trips, is that the game that we're talking about today. Well, first things first, I should probably introduce the series, which is we're talking about the games of Free Radical. The series is called Future Perfect. If you recognize that name, it's probably because of the series of games that bears this name, which is that we're talking about TimeSplitters. Not the second or third ones, which I feel is the ones that people probably know best, but the first one. Although I will say this, because we were talking about Ubisoft a tiny bit, and I do kind of like how they do history modes in the new Assassin's Creed games, where in Assassin's Creed Origins or whatever it's called, the one that's set in Egypt, you can basically go on like an Egyptian tour, and they show you like how they did like the mummification process and like how they used to weave baskets and stuff. This game also goes to Egypt, but it hasn't got nearly as much historical value to it.
No. I've learned how to raid a tomb, which,
That's
being
true.
being a young, strapping British lad, it's very handy.
That's very true, yeah. You never know when you're going to have to raid a tomb. There was... Back in the 90s, there was games all about that. It was mostly... Back in those days, it was more of a woman's job, but it's kind of shifted. It's much like computing. It's now shifted to being kind of blokey.
It's funny,
industry
yeah.
of tomb raiding.
The history of film editing used to be a woman-dominated career. Funnily enough, it was sound that turned it into a mostly male-dominated one.
Is that so?
Yeah, it's a very odd little tidbit of history. I'm not quite sure what it was that changed with the advent of film sound that kind of made... I mean, also... Oh, God. The part of my brain just went... It was maybe a slightly sexist thing of, it's like a very fine, delicate work, film editing, and, trimming the thing, being very, very precise with the reels and the cuts.
So that was exactly the case with computing, was that it wasn't
Typing,
just that...
yeah, typing was mostly considered like a secretarial job, which was...
Yeah, the like literally word processing and like because it was slightly mindless as well because of the sexism of the time. They was just like, oh, we'll have a woman do that. And
have a dame type up them words. We'll say
go.
the important stuff, and babe, you put it down.
We'll go drink whiskey and go play golf all afternoon. Haha. But then they made computing easier, and then like that's when all the dorks came in and were like, okay, I'm making we're making Microsoft, we're making computer software now. Ladies, get out of here. And that's just kind of how it's been since, unfortunately. But speaking of dorks making games, I guess we may need to talk about...
Might need to actually talk about the game 15 minutes
Yeah,
in.
I was going to segue into the dorks that make this games, but considering the fact that I failed to hear anything back from Dr. David Doak about TimeSplitters.
Oh, damn it.
This is only...
It doesn't go for the hard-pressing interviews.
Yeah, I know. I was hoping to get him on. I wanted to ask him some important questions, including what was the thing that you said in the Hayes interview about your Northern Irish heritage? And did you actually Photoshop Graham Norgate in TimeSplitters Future Perfect? Which we'll get into that nugget when we talk about that game. But I guess first things first, because I haven't actually introduced him yet, folks, joining me as guest host on this series is YouTube's very own Captain Ash Snaker.
Hi, hello. I grew up playing these games. I think TimeSplitters 2, to me, is what GoldenEye was to people a bit older than me, and I threw this to James because you've actually played GoldenEye, whereas I have not played GoldenEye.
Yes.
And you didn't bat me back on this one, but we might be able to get a bit more into it. I think TimeSplitters 2 is how people think GoldenEye was.
I agree with you, but I will also I'll put a hat on your statement and say that like GoldenEye was maybe the best shooter you could get at the time, whereas TimeSplitters 2, having played it for this podcast for the first time, holds up incredibly well. Like, to the extent that you could go back and like play a couple of rounds of it and have a pretty good time. GoldenEye, on the other hand, not so much. Although I think relatively soon to when this episode is coming out, the port should be out of GoldenEye for Switch and Microsoft Game Pass.
Have they done any touching up on it, like increase the game speed? I mean, obviously the controls are probably a mite touched up.
So I believe that the controls follow the control scheme that they did with the Perfect Dark remaster they did a couple of years ago, where it is properly twin stick. I imagine, locked 60 FPS as well, which always appreciated. I think that's all I know of so far, and also, if you're a owner of 2015's Rare Replay, not only do you get the game for free, but you also get the... They did so on the Rare Replay disc, they have a bunch of developer interviews where they go through like a couple of like Rare's big games, where it's like, what were they working on at the time, and their general thoughts on it. And they do it for like all the biggies on the disc, except for all the obvious ones that can't be there, like Donkey Kong Country and GoldenEye. But I believe at the time they were trying to get GoldenEye for Rare Replay, so they did shoot interview footage for it. So they are now going to release that interview footage alongside GoldenEye, which is quite cool.
Quite nifty. Good bit of thinking ahead.
No, absolutely. It is funny though, like Donkey Kong related, because just to kind of go back then. So TimeSplitters 2 is your jam, or kind of was your jam when you were growing up multiplayer wise.
Yeah, me and my friends Jack and James. You've spoken to Jack.
Yes.
James has kind of gone off into the wilds, and I had many other mates, and like we would play FPSs a lot, as you do as your kids, and that game had bots, which was great because it could be me and him against bots or just a big brawl, and we played a lot of... I'll get more into it when we do TimeSplitters 2, because that was more the thing of it. But we didn't have TimeSplitters 1, I didn't. It was loaned to me once, and I played one level, and then I was like, this isn't as good as TimeSplitters 2.
I was going to...
9 years old, and just, it wasn't as interesting.
I was going to ask then, so you played 2 before 1 then?
Yeah. Got the series started on 2, played Future Perfect, barely touched 1.
Interesting. So, I mean, I guess it'd be going, like, way too back, but it was just, like, 2 just something that was kind of always around, or was it something you knew about, like, you tried to seek it out?
I happened into it by luck.
Okay.
I could just... So... if anyone watches my channel, and they'll notice, I wound up with just a lot of weird games as a kid. A lot of them I probably shouldn't have had, because I would just I would just go through game stores and I would just pick anything that looked interesting to me, and there were some winners and losers in my rampant game picks, and TimeSplitters 2 was a winner. God, do you want to know the weirdest... I just had a memory unlocked to me. Do you want to know the weirdest, dumbest thing I did as a kid that worked?
Yeah, go ahead.
It just worked in its dumb way. So another thing I loved was the Power Stone games.
Oh,
I was playing Power Stone 1 one day, and I just announced to my mum, I'm going to go buy Power Stone 2. I didn't know it existed. I just went into a shop and it had come out.
As kids.
I was like 6 or 7. Such a dumb swag.
I just imagine you as well. It's just like marching into like to tell your mum, and then just marching down to the shop and just being shocked that it's there.
I wasn't even shocked. Also, I think it's just, I just took reality as I said it existed, therefore it does.
Your confidence was just so crystal clear that you brought Power Stone 2 into existence.
Sadly, I couldn't manifest a TimeSplitters 4 the same way.
I mean, I am trying I've been I've been reading up on like ESP and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I have, like the tweet that somebody wrote, which was, I can't remember if it was like David Lynch or whatever, but they were just like, I thought so many thoughts about him that I managed to put myself in the hospital, but I've just stolen a bunch of drugs, and I'm going to try again this evening with a bunch of UV drips logged in. Yeah, I'm gonna do that with Crytek to see if we can finally get Time Splitters 4 to happen. Which is funny because before starting this series, before we even looked at the games, like I kind of knew what Time Splitters 2 was, but purely in the aspects of like the kind of zeitgeist of older brothers to friends that I went with to school with, and they all had like free games for their PlayStation, which was one of the Grand Theft Autos, a FIFA, and Time Splitters 2. Like
It was a laddish game, and it even appeared in
was.
Shaun of the Dead as the game that Ed plays a lot.
That's true. The fun facts about is it Time Splitters 1 or 2 in Shaun of the Dead? Because I know that
It's
it
Time
has
Splitters 2.
Okay, because I know that it has an announcer which isn't actually in the game, but because they wanted the joke of Ed sits down, no, Sean sits down and it goes, "Player 2 joined," and then Ed goes, "Haven't you got work?" And he goes, "Player 2 left."
Yeah, that was not a feature, and that, boy howdy did that joke annoy me and my mates who... That's not how the game didn't actually annoy us. We didn't give a toss.
I was gonna say I can't imagine you being that much of like an IMDb nerd.
No.
Back in the
I was
day.
11 years old at the time, and even as an 11-year-old video gaming guy, I don't think I had it in me to be that worked up about what was clearly a concession for a gag.
Absolutely not. You didn't want to be an internet pedant about Time
I
Splitters.
might be bigger on the internet today if I was that person, but just
You know what?
didn't
I
have
was
it in
thinking
me.
about that the other day in regards to, and I can't remember what game it was, but it was like, I think I was talking about like when I was 14 and I was kind of an arsehole and a bit of a shit poster, but I grew out of it. But I was like, if I had just kept like that, I'd probably be like, I'm trying to think of like anyone
You'd
on
be
YouTube.
massive.
I would.
You'd be the Doug Walker of your day.
I'd be the British equivalent of Doug Walker.
You might be. You might even be. You might even be like Charlie Brooker.
Oh, that'd be good. Yeah,
That'd be
that'd be alright.
massively
They'll give me
mega.
a science fiction show for Netflix, and they'll be like, what if, what if your computer,
What if your
hated
blankets
you?
remember what you done?
Yeah, what if Crash Bandicoot did revenge porn? How
What
would you
if your floorboards told you how heavy you were all the time?
What if instead of saying "How was your day," you say "What have you done?"
What if your car forced you to speed if you were late for work?
Oh, that'd be good.
There's an episode.
To be honest, that'd be a good episode of Top Gear rather than an episode of Black Mirror. Yeah, they just review a car.
God, imagine the irony of a Top Gear presenter speeding to get to work.
I know. Have any of did Fingy ever get caught speeding? I feel like that's
It must have happened.
Class.
Anyway, going back to it, so give us the history then. Give us the birthplace of free radicals. So they were born from a bunch of Rare lads, weren't they?
So this story begins. So like in the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the monkeys are hitting bones together.
Yes.
Imagine that, but imagine it's Donkey Kong from Donkey Kong Country, because that's what this.
They're hitting Donkey Kong with sticks.
No, it's the monkeys look like really low res 3D rendered Donkey Kongs,
Ah, I see.
and they're all hitting bones, and they're all making the Donkey Kong sound from Super Mario Kart. Basically, so Rare is founded in 1984 by Chris and the other Stamper. I can't remember the other guy's name, unfortunately, but they're brothers. They become a Nintendo subsidiary in 1994 after showing off a demo for... they made a boxing game, but the thing which is really exciting about it is that they used SGI computers to render everything in high-quality 3D, but then they rotoscoped it down into sprites, essentially, so it could run on the SNES. And they show it off to Nintendo, and Nintendo goes, okay, what franchise do you want to play with? And they go, can we have Donkey Kong? And they go, absolutely, let's see what you do with it. And so in 94, they release Donkey Kong Country, and it is the As we mentioned on a previous episode of Bullet Time, I believe Heretic, it's like one of the best-selling games of that year. It did like 2 million units globally, which at the time was like it was the GTA 5 of its day, Donkey Kong Country. And again, the thing that's so impressive about it is the fact that it looks like 3D visuals, but they're able to run it on the SNES. Because this is such a success, Rare decides, right, we need to like double down on this SGI stuff, and we want to make a couple of other games with it. Like one of the initial prototypes that they did was when they did the arcade adaptation of Battletoads. Some of the objects in that game, like rolling spike balls and like spaceships, were also done in this SGI style, but they were deciding, oh, we got to do a fighting game with this. That's like the next logical step, because Mortal Kombat's really popular at the time, because Street Fighter 2 is really popular. And so they hire a couple of people into the company who specifically don't really come from the games industry, but they do have SGI workstation experience. One of them being David Doak, who's just got his doctorate, and he got his doctorate.
Dr. David Doak.
He is Dr. Doak, which is very
Pretty
funny
good.
because that's what his character is in GoldenEye 007.
Funny that a guy whose initials are 3Ds is brought in to do 3D work.
Maybe they. Oh, there we go.
Maybe that got him the job. Maybe that's what he said in the interview.
Maybe that's what he told him. He was like, if you notice, 3Ds.
Dr. David Doak, yeah. You want 3D? You come to me.
I mean, he might be clever enough to come up with that joke because the guy was a microbiologist, and they were using SGI workstations to basically
To model,
render.
to model life, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever they were picking up on the electronic microscopes. Another guy that they bring on is a guy called Carl Hilton, who is a architect, and they were using SGI workstations to essentially do like the floor plans and like fly arounds for new 3D builds. And it's kind of through there that they meet a couple of other people who then go on to form Free Radical. One of them called Graham Norgate, who I believe they're from like relatively early on, but he's like a chiptune guy. Like he comes from the Commodore like 64 days and the Amiga days, and they just kind of bring him on
it for a while then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was. I think one of the games he worked on was a like one of the Game Boy Donkey Kong games.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But all three of them work on Killer Instinct, which is relatively big success in the arcades. It's kind of hard to sort of gauge
It's a
now.
cult classic fighting game.
Yeah, exactly.
Banging soundtrack, big combos.
Yeah, exactly. It was its whole big selling point was it had huge combos and combo breakers and stuff, and it has this technology to it that Donkey Kong had, where it's all 3D renders, and because it's arcade, they can kind of push it a little bit more. So it's quite eye-popping as well. But once that project's done, they're kind of they're sort of in the like trenches of doing N64 stuff then. And somehow Nintendo had the 007 license, because this was at a weird time when they were just kind of shopping around for stuff. Like Nintendo almost made they almost had that Harry Potter license, which I always think is such a weird thing.
Yeah.
Because obviously when the first 3 books came out, it was like white hot, and like the films, they were like shopping those around for ages. And Nintendo made a pitch to be like, can we have the license? JK turned them down.
She's known for good decisions.
Yeah, J.K. Rowling, known for her incredibly good decisions. She didn't like the idea of them being a platform exclusive.
That's very strange.
Yeah, which is why EA ended up with them, because they were like, yeah, we know how to do. We're the biggest.
We'll port it to everything. You'll see it everywhere.
God,
that is such a weird thing to think that of someone like that having a concern about console exclusivity. And I'm trying to imagine what a Nintendo bloody Harry Potter game would be, and my mind is just conjuring a model swap of a Legend of Zelda game.
Yeah, I'm just imagining Ocarina of Time, but with pot.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like Mario 64, and rather than having Peach's Castle, it's the... Hogwarts castle that he lives in, and he
You
goes
know,
into...
maybe throwing it up live, one could be... I wouldn't want to touch a fucking Harry Potter thing.
Absolutely.
The latter games, which would basically Harry Potter via Call of Duty. Well, they were cover shooters, but yeah.
Yeah, no, so Deathly Hallows is literally a Gears of War clone, but rather than having guns, they have wands, and every time you shoot, they shout out the magic spell. It's so
What
good.
a great design. What fantastic. Oh yeah, we got to follow the somatic components.
They should have. I haven't played it. I know that it does have Kinect support, like you mentioned, though.
Oh,
but,
Christ.
I hope that it's like, you know, in Dead Space when you unlock the big foam finger.
Yeah.
And he says bang for single shots, and then he does like he does the Peter K machine gun sound. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. It'd be good if they did that with the wands, and that's how you do machine gun fire. It's just him saying da-na-na-na-na.
So yeah, so they crossed paths, and we could have had Rare or someone else adjacent Harry Potter. But
that could have happened.
So these lads were working at Rare, and I'm guessing they were involved in GoldenEye.
Yeah, so Martin Hollis is the only guy that I haven't... Well, there's Steve Ellis as well, who's a programmer, and I'll mention him in a moment in regards to TimeSplitters. But Martin Hollis is slightly higher up in the company at this point, and the Stampers go to him. Chris and Tim Stamper. There we go, those are the names I was trying to remember.
There it is.
They go to Martin Hollis and they go, do you want to do anything with this? And he's like, well, the people who are working on Killer Instinct haven't got anything, I'll talk to them. And the original concept, according to Doak, is that it was meant to be Virtual Cop on the N64.
Oh.
And they start working on it and they start programming it. And like the whole idea of it making it like Virtual Cop is because the N64 has this big stupid stick. And the idea is that like, oh, we can have that be as precise as like using a light gun in an arcade. But as they kind of work on it, I'm not quite sure how they reach the decision, but they decide, let's take it off rails and let's make it... I think it's because of Super Mario 64. The levels get a little bit smaller and tighter, and they decide to essentially kind of... They add a couple of extra objectives to it, and they decide to kind of let people solve them at their own pace and out of order and stuff like that. But in the result of doing that, it's like, but we still kind of want the precision that you have from Virtual Cop, which is why they end up implementing as kind of like a zoom function, which punches the camera in and kind of gives you full stick control, essentially,
yes.
But at the cost of moving the character. In so much that they kind of, in a weird way, design what will become like how shooting sort of works in FPS games.
It's kind of a prelude to the ADS system where you have slightly imprecise controls or full motion. Like you sacrifice mobility for precision, and we'll get into it when we get into the gameplay of TimeSplitters 1 itself. But, oh boy.
But, so they work along in this game, and, like, GoldenEye is kind of... The way that they described working on it was that it was very... almost a little bit freewheeling. Like, they did have a design document, but they didn't really keep to it. And it was mostly whenever anybody had a good idea, they implemented it. To the extent that in the last 3 months of development is when they implement multiplayer. Something that they hadn't considered previously. It was just going to be a campaign, but then one of them decided... Well, some of these maps work quite nicely as arenas, so why don't we kind of turn this... Because deathmatch is blowing up as a concept on the PC at the time as well, with stuff like Doom and Quake and Unreal. So they go, why don't we have a little bit of that on the console? And so they implement that in. The one thing that they don't manage to implement in there with GoldenEye was that originally they had all the bonds in the multiplayer mode.
So license all of them.
Well, So MGM went to them and said, if you put Sean Connery in the game and he finds out, he is going to tap you up for money. And if Roger Moore finds out that Sean Connery got money, he's going to tap you up as well.
Okay, that's even funnier. I like that sounds almost like a friendly warning, like, hey, we're not going to destroy you in court. Just gonna let you know.
No, it was just more the fact that if Sean Connery discovers there's any way for him to make money, without doing anything, he will. Which I just think is really funny. The other good anecdote from this is, and I've told you this like a million times before, but obviously because it's a Nintendo joint, Miyamoto keeps coming over to like see how the game's doing, because he's like Nintendo's, creative fellow, and he sees the game and he goes, "Oh, it's a bit violent in it." And they're like, "Oh yeah, it's an FES game. Like, what do you expect?" And he goes, "What if at the end of the game, during the credits, all the people that you shot and murdered, you see them in hospital, and they're all in hospital beds lined up, and they're all okay. Like, some of them have got plaster casts if you shot them in the arm. Some of them are like, covered in bandages, full body cast, and then you shake all their hands one by one, and they basically go, "Oh, we haven't really got that. It's in QA. We really haven't got the time." They just shoot it down the game. I just haven't got the time for that, unfortunately.
Politely shooting down who is one of the biggest men in gaming at the time.
The guy who would later see a demo that they make, which is like an RPG game with two cute like animal people in it, and he goes, "Oh, you look a bit like Fox McCloud. This is a Star Fox game now. Good luck."
Oh, Christ. I forgot that anecdote, and at first I thought you were talking about Conker, which... that's a whole story to itself.
Oh, jeez, yeah, Conker's
the script to Conker was mostly improvised and made up as they went.
I can believe that. Yeah. I know that all the film reference stuff was added, like, quite late into the process, which is so funny to think about, considering that, like, that's the most memorable thing about that game is, like, it's just full of movie send-ups. Although I guess it makes sense, the nearer to release date, the more fresh I guess the references are gonna be, so...
Yeah.
But they released GoldenEye, and GoldenEye is a ginormous success, to the point that I would probably say, and I feel like you might agree with this as well, although... you did have an N64 as a kid, right? Or am
I did, though I didn't have GoldenEye. I did have Perfect Dark, but I didn't have an expansion pack. So
so you couldn't play most of it.
I didn't get much out of it.
No, I was going to say,
of
Rare's...
N64, to play Pokemon Stadium.
But Pokemon Stadium's worth it, though, because you also got the little pack with that you could put the Game Boy cartridge in.
Yeah, and then I just played Blue, which...
Speaking of, so funny anecdote with Perfect Dark, which we won't talk about too much because Perfect Dark's quite similar to this, but
there's a design evolution from GoldenEye to TimeSplitters.
Yeah, which Perfect Dark is kind of like an interesting middle of that, but so they were going to use the transfer pack where you could put the Game Boy cartridge in and like take photos of yourself and your mates and put them as like characters in the multiplayer.
And I can imagine how this got shot down.
Nintendo said, people would use this for bullying. Don't do it. And they were like, okay. We won't, then, I guess.
What cowards.
I know. They should have, but, well, apparently that was the...
This will be used for bullying. I actually... my brain is going through more and more. This was 1999, right?
So this was after Columbine.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, my brain clicked some cultural context back in there. It was like, okay, yeah, that's just savvy. Not having kids buy a game, put pictures of other kids in it, and then fucking blow them away with a shotgun.
Well, actually, even funnier than that. So Perfect Dark is 2000, so it is still after Columbine. But here's the interesting thing. That comes out earlier in the year, and fucking TimeSplitters comes out the same year as Perfect Dark.
That is fucking mental to me.
So... this is because, so essentially, GoldenEye does massively, and what I was going to say was that I think of all of Rare's stuff, GoldenEye is probably the most important game they've made as a developer. Like, Banjo's okay, and Donkey Kong is obviously, they've rebooted a character.
It's a standout in a genre. It's the, like, not birth of console shooting, but, it invigorates it a lot. So, from a kind of cultural standpoint, it stands out the most. It's doing the most.
It's the big shift, and it's like it's the kind of like, I don't know. I guess like, to kind of give it a shitty term, it's like the Beatles of FPS games, because without it, you don't get like Halo, you don't get Call of Duty, you don't get like all of these other, like especially console FPS games don't really figure themselves out until GoldenEye comes along, especially the multiplayer, and kind of shows people this is how it's done, essentially. Like, this is how you improve from here. Because GoldenEye is antiquated nowadays. Like, it is cute just going back to it and just seeing what it's like, but if you've played Halo, if you've played Battlefield, it just feels like very
It's the Seinfeld. All those gags have been done again by other TV shows. So if you go back and watch it now with all that context, it feels like this doesn't feel too revolutionary. But if you put it the fact that this birthed everything else, then you understand the context.
Exactly. And Perfect Dark is kind of just it's not even a refinement, it's just more GoldenEye. Nintendo don't renew the license. There was a one and done. They made GoldenEye 007 and they made a Game Boy James Bond RPG, and that was it out of the license. And so
it's worth bearing James Bond in mind for far later on in this side series.
Oh yeah.
It
Bond
will come back around.
Yeah, but the spectre, and especially the spectre of GoldenEye is going to come in. Is going to play an interesting part later in this series. But they go, well, why don't we have our own franchise, which is Super Spies, but we can do our own thing. So they put more of their influences in it. So they're really into Luc Besson, which is interesting with TimeSplitters 1, which I'll get into with that. But they like La Femme Nikita, so they make their protagonist a woman, kind of a bit like Lara Croft as well, which is popular at the time. And that's how we get Joanna Dark. It's a little bit more science fiction, so the guns can be a bit more interesting. And Perfect Dark is also kind of when they start to experiment with bots, which again is a neat, like, really popular on the PC because not everybody has got like nobody's got broadband at this point, but not everyone's got like a decent internet connection. But they want you to have that kind of LAN deathmatch feeling wherever you are in the world. So, like, bots become really popular through there, and they decide to implement that in a really simple way in Perfect Dark, which is, quite impressive for what they do. But
Lamhoot has a really, really good video on kind of Perfect Dark's design and has a big section on the bots and the customizability of their AI. They had behavior sets that you could really configure and make it play however you wanted. You could set up bots to go in a bunch of different scenarios, and there's a bunch of different game modes. It is very much a kind of tool you could toy around with for hours if you so chose.
Yeah.
Without the need for a bunch of other people.
Yeah, no, I just think because it's funny. I mean, I guess maybe we'll talk about this when we talk about I was about to say Titanfall, kind of giving away what I was going to talk about. But when we talk about TimeSplitters 1 properly and get into the bots of that,
yeah.
But in all of this, the guys who worked on GoldenEye and worked on Perfect Dark kind of decide we'd like to make more of this, but we kind of know that under Rare's management, we're probably not really going to get the chance to. There could be the time where they say, we need more hands on deck on like a new Donkey Kong game or a new Banjo game. And they've got something good with this. And I think they're also kind of seeing that like technology shifting and like Nintendo doesn't seem super interested in like making a competitor console to what's on the market. They may do their own thing. So they decide, we got a little bit of gas behind us. Like, we're being interviewed by Edge, like with John Romero, like we've created this rock star product. Why don't we do our own thing? And through there, they sign a contract with Eidos and they form Free Radical Limited. They move the business from Twycross, where Rare is based, and they move it to Nottingham, which is a couple of miles up the road. And initially, the big game that they're going to work on is kind of a semi-sequel to Perfect Dark and GoldenEye, where they did suave Bond-style spying, then they did sci-fi spying, and then this one is going to be psychic spying.
Huh.
Kind of inspired a little bit like by Metal Gear Solid, and the game is called Redemption. And Eidos, because they're the GoldenEye guys, they go, we'll give you 3 years and we'll give you this much money and let's see what you come up with. And initially, the plan was their first game was going to be Second Sight.
Yeah, that's the moment you said psychic spying as...
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that took a while. That's in the middle of all of this.
Yeah, so that's the funny thing, is that, like, the original plan was going to be something which was ostensibly a story game. They were going to use the power of new hardware to, do eye-popping visuals and, like, psychic powers and stuff, but they don't have getting a PS2 development kit at this time. This is like, so they leave Rare as Perfect Dark goes into QA. Like, they're like, we've done the development on this. You don't need us anymore. If this needs to be tweaked, give it to somebody else at Rare, which is kind of what happens with that. And they start work on, like, they managed to squeeze a development kit out of IDOS for a PS2. And in about 3 weeks, Steve Ellis, who's one of the lead programmer on TimeSplitters 1, gets a demo up and running. And it's basically, you're running around a room, you have a gun, you have, like, simple enemy AI and stuff. And they're having a lot of fun with it, but they kind of realize that, we could do something a bit more interesting here in regards to, rather than do what everyone else is going to do on the PS2, which is going to be, like, single-player adventure, eye-popping visual kind of stuff, why don't we kind of lean into what we're good at and do a multiplayer game instead? Because it's probably unlikely that there's going to be something like this on launch day. And so they go over, because IDOS at this time is like, no, you got to do what you promised. You got to give us, redemption.
Oh boy.
So they go over their head and they tell Sony and they say, we don't want to do that game anymore. We want to do this game instead. And Sony says, yeah, okay, we'll tell off IDOS and let you make this game instead.
Oh, those crafty fucks.
But basically for the promise of, you can release this by launch day. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, off you fucking pop, because they have 10 months then to throw this together.
They have, an interesting position they put themselves in.
But somehow they
did it.
They do pull it. They somehow managed to pull it off, which is,
well, okay.
Oh,
so this brings me to the first thing I'm going to say, because I'm not going to deny they did it, but, and this comes from the perspective of someone who grew up playing TimeSplitters 2, I think. This feels, and I hate to put it this way because it's very reductive, and I'll dig more into it. This game feels like a beta to a different game.
It feels like a game that you would get on a demo disc.
Yeah,
it's the full game. It is.
Yeah, it's a full game long demo.
Yeah, it is. It's shocking how much they manage. I will say, from my initial impressions of it, I thought it was literally just going to be the multiplayer and nothing else. But the fact that there is like an arcade mode in it, that they put some they put effort into all of it. Like, that's the thing. But you can tell where they prioritize some stuff over others. And just kind of from their own interviews, like, the two big things that they knew that this game needed up front was bots, because they had been working on that with Perfect Dark, and considering it was still huge in the PC space, they knew that, well, if you have a PS2, and I believe this game does support the multi-tap, which is interesting, because the PS2 didn't launch with one, but actually, I can't remember, so could you plug...
I can't remember if it launched with multi-tap, but it was a pretty early release, at least.
Yeah, and I was going to say,
could 4 players was...
Could you plug old PS1 stuff into the... Like, your controllers, could you plug those into the PS2?
That I don't know. I never tried it.
No, because I wondered if it had like a bit of a Wii U style backwards compatibility thing of, not only do the games run on the PS2, but you can plug all your peripherals and stuff in as well, which is why, like, the controller ports are the same shape, and and it has memory card slots like the PS1 as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if, as a launch game, maybe it does support the old multi-tap and some of the old controllers, because it doesn't have pressure-sensitive buttons or anything like that. It is very much... It is what it is. But Yeah, so it is this outlier at the time of that it's a 4-player multiplayer game, but you can pump the numbers up to about, I think, about eight players, like four regular humans and like
side.
4 bots.
Yeah. So I'll just quickly say, because I think,
Go
talking
ahead.
about the single player side of it, I think there is. I looked at my playtime because I recorded all of it, and just in doing campaign mode, I got 5 hours, and that would be a lot shorter if I didn't try and hard mode every stage. Because here's the setup of how the campaign works, and this I'll get into my kind of experience going through it a little bit, which was you pick a level and they come in batches of 3, and they're easy, normal, hard. So left and right gets you from like level to level, up and down select your difficulty. Starts in like an Egyptian tomb and then goes on to like
A Chinese
a
restaurant.
Chinese stage, then a cyber den, and it kind of loops these themes, not always consistently, but it's like historical, industrial, sci-fi, and horror. There's a bunch of themes.
So funnily enough, in reading a bit of interview about that, yeah, they had the kind of like the rule of 3 structure as well. But the thing that they liked was that because they had done Spies with GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, they kind of wanted to expand it a little bit more to what are other things that where you can do shooting. And the 3, like the whole. So here's the funny thing, and you can probably guess this from playing the game. TimeSplitters 1 wasn't originally designed with plot. What they had in mind was
the plot is in the manual, and that was my funny experience of the story, because every level you do the exact same thing, and I don't mean that in like a derogatory way. It's very fun, arcadey. You spawn in a location, you have to find an object, then find an extraction point. In your way are a bunch of enemies, and it doesn't tell you explicitly, but every time you beat a difficulty, your time is logged next to it. So there is a subtle inclination of, and I did fall into this, hey, pump that time down. Like, shave some seconds.
Yeah, and very much in the arcadey aspect as well is that like it's called the single player is called arcade mode, and by completing levels in arcade mode, you unlock stuff for the multiplayer. So like characters essentially
And cheats.
And cheats, yeah,
like
which
big
is
head mode, which was a perennial favorite of PS2 cheats. The big head mode.
that's
Everyone loved the big head
classic
mode.
GoldenEye. That's they had big head mode and Donkey Kong mode where they gave the characters Donkey Kong proportions.
There's also ridiculous cheats, like one that makes every enemy carry a rocket launcher, so
That's
a
good.
fucking ultra hard run, and that works in the story / arcade mode. And on the opposite end, one that turns everyone into bricks, one that turns everyone into gingerbread men. There's like a lot of model swapping cheats in this game to just make it even more stupidly comedic.
It's got a good sense of humor to it.
It doesn't have a lot of the trademark sense of humor yet, but there is a levity to the game, a sort of a sense throughout all of it that, you know, you're not taking this too seriously. Like, you turn the game on, you run a level, or you go on with some mates, you fight some bots, and it's just, you know, it's just a fun thing to dump a few hours into. You don't have to think about it.
And it has a sense of humor, which is like Rare's games had like a kind of subversive streak to them. Like Donkey Kong Country, you have Cranky Kong, who's the original Donkey Kong, who's just a bitter old man who just complains about like games were better back in my day. And like Conker's Bad Fur Day, which is all these movie send-ups and also like parodies of like game culture at the time. This doesn't have that so much, but
this is more just kind of anarchically goofy.
Yeah, it's a little silly. It wears a silly hat.
And it is funny with you going to them, you know, they talked about making Joanna Dark and Perfect Dark with, oh, we're not tied to James Bond, we can go sci-fi so we can have a bit more freedom on the design, the guns. TimeSplitters is just, for encouraging that design, is this perfect little idea of, with this we can just go and do whatever we want.
Yeah.
Like, any level theme, any weapon, any enemy, big, goofy, exaggerated character models, bang.
And the cool thing is that they do a bloke with Bond and they do a one with Joanna Dark, and in TimeSplitters 1 you get a choice. Do you want to play as a
every stage is a male or a female character choice. Presented through an incredibly charming character select, which is a kind of police lineup, and then you pick the character, and there are sometimes exceptionally long, like, character establishing animations. Every character, there's 64 characters in the game, and they're not all like super expressive. Some are just boring, like male SWAT, female SWAT,
Brown
robot.
zombie,
Yeah, but for a lot of the more kind of outlandish ones, there's perfect little kind of, they're all very nicely presented kind of stock characters, and there's a lot of sense of fun in it, like just little pop cultural nuggets.
Well, yeah,
in every character.
So like so they took like a lot of stuff from like film, like again they like Luc Besson's stuff, and like again Conker's Bad Fur Day's full of film references, and you get to this and it's just kind of like, oh well, we want like a 70s detective, so you have like Harry Tipper. We want to do like like a Resident Evil send up, and so you have the mansion with like a teenage like goth girl and stuff like that. They get quite creative with it, and the thing is that with them, the three kind of level types that they hit upon, which is funny when you get into the later ones, because they sort of keep this going as well, is that they do horror, crime, and sci-fi. And crime is like the most nebulous one, because crime is...
because it does go into kind of spy fiction a bit with with like the docs level and so on.
Oh yeah, totally. Like the only one that could be kind of considered crime is the Chinese restaurant.
China, yeah, where you're kind of attacking a triad base. That's the fourth stage, and that's where the difficulty really starts kicking in for me. To kind of get into the gameplay of it, because it's very fast-paced, and okay, so I've not played GoldenEye. You can confirm that it is a bit like GoldenEye, which is a lot like GoldenEye.
Yeah, the way that you move feels very... The way that the guns
There's a sort of soft lock-on aim, which in all but... Okay, I'm going to break it down. So, you move very fast in this game. It does have a primary fire and an alt fire, and I know Perfect Dark was very well liked for its alternate fire modes. This game doesn't have that. They are... No. I was on the Wikia earlier on, just doing a little bit of research, and a note I found, which is very funny, in the game's trivia, which was, trivia note. The secondary fire of all weapons in the game seem to lift the weapon higher, giving the impression of more recoil, even if nothing else changes. So there are a few weapons in the game that don't actually really have an alt fire, but they just make the kick look more impressive.
we have bullets and bigger bullets.
We have bullet and we have bullet. Bullet. I did find it very amusing. I thought... So, obviously, I'm playing emulated, and that has gotten in the way before in this podcast. But for this game, I thought all the machine guns sucked until I realized that all alt-fire did was give them a slower firing rate, which made them seem far less powerful. Because the slower firing rate does nothing for accuracy, because this game, your character has amazing lock-on, and there is even, in the options, there is an ability to toggle the lock-on off, like toggle the soft lock off. I think the game would be impossible without it, because this is a run and gunner. Like, if you're playing it fast, you are running, you are memorizing enemy locations, and you're just... A lot of this game is learning how to run into a room the right way to gun everyone down as fast as possible. And a fast run of this game feels so satisfying. It feels like an action movie event.
Oh, yeah.
When this game's in a good flow state, it is so punchy and fast, and it feels incredible. And the lock-on aim really does do a lot for it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, like, this definitely feels... I mean, like, they like films, and this... Like, it's as you kind of nailed on the head there. This feels like a way more, like, kind of cinematic experience versus... the game that they made, which was actually based on a film.
It's funny like, you feel like you are running through, and you are in this kind of hardcore Harry, whatever it was called, just kind of headspace of you're just running through and blasting guys. And to go back to the my favorite though on the primary fire and alt fire are the shotguns, because I picked up on it myself, and it's the strangest thing. The alt fire primary fire changes the grouping of the shotguns.
Oh!
Like, I don't know if it's alt fire or primary fire, but one of them has such, like, tight grouping that if any level with a double barrel, you essentially have, like, a medium range rifle that kills everything in a single shot. It's absolutely insane, and that's why hard mode runs became impossible, because there are a few stages which have so many enemies with that gun that you just walk into a room and fucking die, because enemies with that gun on higher difficulties are so fast and so aggressive that I looked at it, and there are times when I'll enter a room, and frames later I'll be dead. It's so awful, and that brings me to my downsides, which are, as the game goes on, and even near the beginning, on the higher difficulties, this game has horrible enemy spawning, and like really it wants you to replay it a lot and memorize, so there are just really horrible trial and error trap rooms where you just have to know exactly how to approach them, and even then it's not very fun.
No,
Cyber
Den is the worst for that, where that's like...
For me it was 1970s industrial. That I tried for like an hour to beat it on hard, and I could not. God. I think that was the point where I just decided, okay, yeah, I'm not doing this.
No, it reminded me of when I was reading into the research of it, and they said that like GoldenEye was inspired by Virtua Cop. Nothing in that game feels like it, but some of the enemy placement in this does feel like
you're meant to be following a set path because you would never predict them being there otherwise.
No, it's the House of the Dead thing where your character suddenly turns 180 degrees because he knows there's two enemies behind them.
And it does make sense anecdotally with the fact that I was quite surprised by the amount of enemy animations for like they would take cover behind boxes and very cinematically like fly out, returning 180 degrees from cover. And that does kind of fit the Virtua Cop mold of the enemies being, like, they're acting it up.
The funny thing is that it does carry over a little bit. So, like, what the unique selling point of GoldenEye was that because it was a console FPS and they needed to make it possible to kind of aim and stuff like that. And I'm just cribbing this from Aaron Signal's video about GoldenEye, but it has per limb like aiming. So if you shoot an enemy in the leg, they start to hop on the other leg like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Or if you shoot them in the arm, they'll like drop their gun. And TimeSplitters doesn't have that massively. It does have enemies react depending where you shoot them, but it's not super obvious. And I think it's down to the fact of what you were saying, that it's a lot more fast-paced. This feels way more like Quake is like the biggest game in the world at the moment, so we should make it a little bit speedier, because this does have the GoldenEye ADS zoom in aiming stuff, but I used it a little bit on the level where you're in a big warehouse and you're like a spy, and the item that you're getting is jewels, because there's a lot of snipers about, and so it's kind of good for that. But a lot of the game's pace, manual aim just isn't cutting it, because you have to be so quick. But in the few moments where you can afford to be proactive rather than reactive, I didn't use the sniper rifle like once in this game. Really?
I found it easy. Actually, do you know what's funny? Once I found out that, the one firing mode on pistols makes them fire ultra fast and they are ultra effective, I just sniped with pistols by just pointing the gun vaguely in the direction and firing until the auto aim decided the enemy was dead.
That's pretty good.
That was my, I guess we could call it a strategy. The per limb aiming thing, though, does bring me to the fact that TimeSplitters does have one of the most annoying, worst enemies in gaming history, in my opinion.
Is it the zombies that you have to shoot their heads off in order to kill them?
So the game only really has 3 enemy types, 4 if you count the TimeSplitters, but I think they're just, they're kind of basic. But it has turrets, which are immune to auto-aim, so you have to manual aim, and I don't think they're so bad, because as long as you hit them, you can get away with it. Then there's the zombies, where the auto-aim defers to about the chest, I think.
Yes.
So you have to manual aim, but they are just so annoying, and the weapons are so finicky, even in precision aiming mode, that I would just walk up to them and just fire until I just lucked into a headshot to just get them over with. Because precision aiming was more frustrating and about as efficient on ammo as just blasting them until just please die.
It is really funny, because like I was trying to think of because the arcade mode in this is very... If any other developer had did it, it could have just been that every level has a different theme, but you do pretty much exactly the same thing through it. But they do try and vary stuff up in regards to some levels have like they're very kind of corridor heavy. Some levels have a lot of snipers alleys, and then you have the zombie levels where they change the rules of you have to knock their heads off, and it's cute, but it doesn't. So I think it's something. Well, I mean, I think we're gonna. I think this is like this is how I would describe TimeSplitters 1, which is they eventually do this correctly in TimeSplitters 2.
Yeah, this feels like a test bed because genuinely. And this kind of reveals to me how little I really knew about this game going in, which was I spent up until I think the penultimate level thinking, when does the story begin? Like, I was just thinking, when am I going to get... Maybe that's just a sign of how modern gaming has corrupted my mind that I think, oh boy, I need some motivation here, because I was getting on fine with it. I was just... In the back of my head, the first level you go and you nick an Ankh, and that seems kind of important, and then the importance of the objects fluctuates very wildly between stages.
Yeah.
Until you get to genuinely this got a fucking laugh out of me. Especially
the Spaceways level, yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't know it was the final level. And then when I got to credits, I realized how great a joke it was. The final level of this game... Do you want to say it, James?
Okay, so pretty much for all of them is that you go into a level and you're kind of playing a character who is like, I need to get a thing and I need to get out. Like it's got,
and they all have some level of like implied actual importance.
Yeah, so like in the mansion, it's you have to get remains to destroy them so the zombies go. The letter afterwards, which is the docks, it's like you have to get a ransom. But in the final level, which is Spaceways, which I absolutely love as well because this is where like they're still Luc Besson fans because it looks kind of Fifth Element-y. And the music, which is all done by Graham Norgate, who's essentially like... He's like a kid in a candy store, because they went to him and they said, can you like make a soundtrack for like all these different time periods? And he was like, abso-fucking-lutely, yes I can. And so for this, he basically dials in a pitch-perfect Fifth Element soundtrack parody to the extent of like... In that film where they have the blue opera singer... They have the same thing in this, but they just have this woman warbling over it like it's this amazing sci-fi future. But you play as a robot in a spaceport who basically what he's going after is not jewels or anything like that. He wants to get his duty free and then get a flight. That's
it. You are blasting away an airport to nick your duty free and get out. And that's what it ends on. Like, you finish that and it goes to credits, and it's this perfect, like, comedic ending gag, which is so understated because there is no story in this game, and it just ends on that. A robot robbing a future airport. It's goofy and it's just very charming, and I really like it.
And you know, I think... So I got some questions then. So I think Spaceways might be my favorite level of the arcade mode because one, it's got that funny tone to it, but two, a lot of the levels are you go from A to B and then you have to retrace your steps out of the level. And I think it's kind of cool in the Tomb level, but then they do that a few more times.
Yeah, I think Cyberden is kind of cool because that level kind of closes you off and then loops you around in a different way.
Yeah.
And if you know the level, you can actually get the goods and then be out in about 20 seconds. And I think that's neat. There is some experimentation with the kind of looping format, but for a lot of it, yeah, you kind of just do it and then you play the level in reverse. And it's very efficient on making use of the game space, but not terribly interesting.
No, I forgot to mention this. Well, I suppose I could have mentioned when we were talking about GoldenEye, but Carl Hilton, he's like the art lead on this game, but he's also the level lead. When he was on GoldenEye, because he was an architect, all those places kind of had like almost like a lot of the rooms had realistic function to them, which is like why it had like bathrooms and stuff that you might not ever go. This is where it feels like almost a kind of a style exercise in making it more like gamey, I guess, in a weird way. And I think in that respect it does work super well.
The buildings are sort of weird and chaotic, but I was kind of it's kind of funny on the 1970s Chinese level where you kind of have, very, very stereotypical, like, triad, Chinese restaurant meeting area. And then you kind of cut through to the back, and there is a bathroom, and there is, the kitchen, and there is still some of that sensibility, but it is all, obviously, action movie-ized.
My favorite thing with the Chinese, it's not so much it's the level itself, but it's it was doing research on it, was that in that level it has the old thing of that if you shoot the gong, it makes a gong noise, and it's like, yeah, of course it would do that. I tried looking for Easter eggs for this game, and every single website was like, here's an Easter egg you might not know. If you shoot the gong in the Chinese level, it makes a gong sound. It's like, that's not really an Easter egg. That's very obvious.
That's just they kind of thought it through, really.
Yeah. I was thinking, though, I would say that the levels that I don't like so much are the horror ones, and I think it's just because...
Mansion 1965 is by far and away my least favourite. It kind of contends with Chemical Plant, but they are my least favourite difference. Chemical Plant because it is the enemy spawning at its worst.
Yes.
And Mansion 1965 because it's the enemy typing at its worst.
God, imagine if they combined those two things.
Oh yeah, they could have combined their powers and had horrible zombies spawning, and I would have been in fucking heaven.
Meanwhile, I'm not a massive fan of Planet X, which is
good music. Good fucking music.
I like the music, but the I don't know, just the level design itself, it was a little bit too, like, because everything's Martian red rock, it all kind of starts to look the same.
That's kind of the same problem with, like, I like the opening of 1950s Village, which is a horror one, and I like it's kind of tight and it's got a very kind of Cthulhu vibe. But then you get to the cliff sides, and it is just a rolling texture on an ugly rock face, and it is so hideous to look at. Like, you're not looking at the walkways because you just want to look out to sea and get some atmosphere rather than walking along the side of the Great Mighty Pooh from Conker. Just to your right.
Whereas the funny thing is that because I was playing games out of order for this podcast, the moment I got to the docks level, I was just having hot Vietnam flashbacks to the fucking docks level from Black.
Oh boy, docks was inoffensive. That level,
it's just very
too much.
It's very simple. It reminds me of like if you were learning game design and you made your own level. You were like, well, I know how to do blocks, and docks kind of look like just big boxes. I'll just do that. And like you go inside and they have like walkways and stuff like that, which again is, I don't know, they do cool stuff with it. I feel like they're like the docks level that they do in TimeSplitters 2 slightly better than the docks level in this.
Oh, and talking about their legacy with basically the way things worked in Perfect Dark, and I imagine GoldenEye as well, is that easy, normal, hard wouldn't just affect how much damage you took and how clever the enemies were and what you had available. It would add additional bits to do to the levels.
Yes.
And that does follow in TimeSplitters, but it's most... I think they blow their load a bit too quickly on this one. It follows throughout the game, but easy, normal, hard on Tomb, every iteration from easy to hard, the tomb gets much bigger. On hard, it is about 3 or 4 times the length. It's a huge level. It does make going back out really annoying and unfun, because it's not a fun level to do in reverse tomb on hard. But you get to it, and they are adding new level chunks. It's not just repeated corridors, like whole bits of unique architecture are locked off. And as it goes on, basically easy, I think, on every stage, just cuts the level in half. Like, you are so much closer to your objective. The enemies are severely dumbed down. But by hard, it's like, you have to survive much, much longer against enemies that are way, way tougher. Again, Chemical Plant. They are cheeky with it, actually, because there is a great shortcut on normal that I needed to win. On hard, that's locked off. After the stage is already much harder. And that kind of thing keeps happening, is the level does funnel you down its toughest sections, and it gets longer, and the enemies more numerous, and it's fascinating. You can tell that, 10 months, and, going a new route, they are trying to do all these elements that they've been working on and seeing in their levels, and some of them not quite there. The core gameplay is better, but all the ads are not quite there yet.
No, and it's funny because like TimeSplitters 2 would kind of go back more to the style of the level architecture remains the same throughout. Like, they don't extend levels, but it's just more they give you some extra stuff to do in them. Like in the Siberia level, the opener, which is like a fucking Bond pastiche, it is you take out the satellite dish and like the incriminating files, and it is like it's like the damn level of GoldenEye 007. But I don't know, it is interesting. It does make me think of like, as I'll probably say this when we talk about Titan. I keep wanting to call it Titanfall because that's a T.
It's really just sitting on your mind. A lot of this, how much of this podcast, drinking game, every time we say, well, we'll get to that in TimeSplitters 2. Take a shot.
Yeah, I know. We'll get to that in Titanfall. I will say what's funny, though, is that... So, yeah, the game didn't have any plot in it, and it didn't even really have a name. But then IDOS were like, this needs something. And apparently the name for the game and the concept ended up coming out of... they were making models for the horror levels, and one of them was called like a zombie splitter, and it had like this design of like an open up rib cage and like skin draped over it. And it looked quite alien, so they said, why don't we make those the bad guys? And then because we keep going between different time periods, why don't we say they're like time travelers or something?
They are coming in from another dimension or some such and fight them off.
Yeah, exactly. You get the thing in a level, and they try and stop you getting the thing.
That's the second half. During the exfiltration, you have to deal with a new wave of enemies who spawn in, who are called the TimeSplitters, and there's the implication of plot, or that there is. That's kind of what it is. There's not a plot. There's the implication of plots.
Yeah, it's like it's got a hint of plot to it, like you would add a hint of salt to something. This has the hint of plot to it, which I don't mind too much, but again, it's like one of those things that they kind of hit the perfect balance. They kind of Goldilocks it in the next one, and then the third one has almost too much plot.
Yeah, there's a balance that kind of gets skewed over the course of this series. But
it is funny though, because usually when we do bullet time, it's like, oh, it's all about the campaigns. Yeah, this game had a multiplayer mode, but it's no PC game, whatever.
I mean, we have kind of done that in this one, because we have talked about a plot in which nothing happens.
No, we talked about stuff happens, and the shooting does feel really good. It feels that multiplayer is pretty much
of the closest contemporary to this, not contemporary, the closest modern iteration on modern TimeSplitters. It reminds me a lot of the game Maximum Action on Steam, which is been in early access. It's bloody 2018, and I have no idea if it would be finished, but that follows very much in this mold where each level is inspired by an action movie, and you got jump kicks and you got all that. So it leans more in the kind of, John Woo hard-boiled style.
Yeah.
But TimeSplitters feels like that. It feels just a bunch of disconnected action scenarios, and if you go into it with that mindset, it's a lot of fun, because it's just a dollop of raw creativity. Every stage is exactly what it needs to be. And actually another fun one on that, so one of my favourite little gags from it is, what year does the Cyber Den take place?
2020.
No. 2005.
Oh!
As my favourite little bit is, so this game came out in 2000, was it? 2001?
Yeah, the year 2000.
And I don't know, I find it very funny, because there was the whole thing of, there was the rash of games and movies from the 80s and 90s, which were like, in the futuristic year 2000, it's this ridiculous future where we've accelerated hundreds of years in technology. Meanwhile, this game is like, there are like cybered up mutants and a horrible dystopian future. It's 4 years out. It's just this wonderful little, just dry gag that I appreciate.
No,
all of the future levels are like stupid close to our own time.
I mean, yeah, it is pretty good. Like, just again, yeah, it has that kind of old B movie feel to it. It's funny because like the way that I was thinking of this game, and I guess if anybody out there is a game developer and wants to make the game that I want most. Is that it is kind of like Crash Bandicoot 3 if it was an FPS game, as in all the levels are quite tight and linear, and you kind of do the same thing throughout all of them, but the thematics keep changing, and they do keep like the platform. Well, not the platforming fresh. They keep the shooting fresh because they take similar pieces and they keep finding new ways to rearrange them. And it is a shame that like nobody has done like an FPS today. Well, apart from like the New Blood stuff that we've kind of touched on that one as well. But like,
Yeah.
just a linear string of levels, like not a battle royale, not a Far Cry 3 style game. Just...
Okay, I've got a genre-ish question then.
Okay.
And this is very hair-splitty, and I'm not a fan of genre kind of, I'm not a fan of locking things down too much. Would you call TimeSplitters 1 a boomer shooter? Or do you think it narrowly escapes that? Or not even narrowly, do you think it just escapes that? It's its own little thing?
So it's hard to... I mean, because when you call something a boomer shooter, it is like very much...
It's kind of loaded, and it's one of those you know it when you see it things, and I think it's not quite.
No, and I think as well, because at this point, boomer shooters have kind of evolved into their own thing, but initially it was very much like Quake was.
This almost has the speed of a boomer shooter, but it doesn't have the feel, it doesn't have the tactileness.
No, not quite the vernacular. Like this is a console game straight up. Like this is designed around the limitations of that, where boomer shooters are very much like, even though they're built around mouse look, because how the hell else would you make an FPS
Yeah, because you need
today?
that speed and precision, whereas this makes up for a lack of precision by handling a lot of it for you, and you really mostly just have to worry about movement and positioning and weapon choice.
That is a really good question, though, because, yeah, like, it probably wouldn't take a lot of tweaks to turn this into more of a boom. You'd probably have to
increase... You just need a bit more verticality and a bit more radical weapon choice. Oh, speaking of controls, actually... God...
Yes.
If you do play this game for yourself, turn off the inverted... well, that's optional, inverted controls. It screwed me, but turn off the best weapon switching. That killed me so much before I thought, okay, I'm just switching this shit off. Because the game will auto-swap. Even if you already have all your weapons, it will auto-swap when you get an ammo refill to the most powerful weapon. And that killed me so much when I'd be in a gunfight and I would walk over a shotgun. And because the game only prioritizes raw damage potential, it would always swap me from an assault rifle to a shotgun, and I would die.
It's so funny that that is like... Going back and playing all these old FPS games, that just seems to be the standard, because it's like... Because they make Doom, and Doom makes every weapon like it's opening a Christmas present. Like, the shotgun's on a... Well, the chainsaw's on a pedestal, and the shotgun has its own special rooms. So, like, every weapon that you get is like a step up. Versus, like, all the other FPS developers kind of took that and was like, well, that's how we have to do guns. You pick up a new gun, and it just switches to that gun. And...
This is the worst for it.
Because, I mean, as you said, this game is so quick that you pick up guns so quickly that, you just kind of change out, and it just, it fucks up the game.
It's really horrible, and just turn that off, and the game becomes immediately several times more palatable, because it killed me a lot in the Chinese level, because it's so tight, and so many enemies have shotguns, but... It's not genuinely a level meant for the M16 or the Uzi or whatever, where you run through, you just need pure fire because you're dealing with hordes. You don't want a double barrel, because that won't do it. It's not going to do it.
No, absolutely not. And, I had a point like right on the tip of my tongue, but unfortunately I've lost it. But it is like really funny, because, it wouldn't take a lot to kind of turn this into a boomer shooter, but I remember what I was going to say. So the thing that I really like about old PS2 games, especially like going through the podcast for this, because they hadn't quite figured out FPS games yet, configuration menus just seemed to be the norm on this. And it let you like even change what the sticks did. So if you want to play in stupid GoldenEye mode where the right stick makes you look up and down in strafes, you can do that. Or you can do it the normal way, where up and down lets you look up and down, and left and right turns the camera left and right. And again, you can change like where the shoulder, what shoulder buttons are doing the shooting, which again, I appreciate that, playing that with an Xbox One controller. And it's funny, like after kind of Halo comes out, and then later into the PS2 era, games become less interested with giving players controller configuration. It's like, no, we know what we're doing out of the box. And
there's almost a benefit of ignorance.
Yeah, I almost think so. I mean, the Raven Software games are the funniest for it, because they had like complete controller configuration out of the box, plus multiple levels of aim assist, because they were like, well, if you're on the controller, you can't aim at all, so we'll just give you RoboCop-style auto-snap to every single enemy. Which this game doesn't have, and I guess I kind of appreciate that it doesn't have that.
It's funny because you have no crosshair in this game. Your gun is very floaty, and it has almost a soft aiming feel where you turn and your gun does a big, over-exaggerated turn to the direction you're gonna look.
Yeah.
But it only at extreme distances, which this game doesn't typically have, you will be very confident that if you are looking at an enemy, the character will know to just fire at them.
Yeah.
It's very reliable, trustworthy in that regard.
It's very GoldenEye.
Yeah.
The gun swings in that game are like, so overly exaggerated, and I guess it's because, the gun gets there before you do, so at least you know you're going to land the shot first, so... which is pretty good. One thing we haven't mentioned yet, though, because talked about the multiplayer a little bit, talked about the single player, and basically the two things that they wanted to nail with this game were bots, which we kind of went into, and map maker. Because when they were working on GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, they kind of pushed the N64 as much as they could to do kind of player expression stuff, even to the extent that they wanted players to let themselves, use the Game Boy camera to put themselves in the FPS. But the next step of that they were never going to be able to pull off on the N64 was essentially a map maker, because at this point in the year 2000, you had the Unreal editor, you had the Quake editor and stuff, and people were starting to make maps for games, and Counter-Strike kind of comes out of that, DDoS, that isn't an original Counter-Strike map, is it? That is somebody's...
No, that was made by a custom mapper. Made pretty much on the fly as it goes.
Interesting.
It's funny, he kind of talks about when he a little bit of Counter-Strike history, which I find really fun. D-Dust was very much just kind of improvised as a map and just took off by sheer luck. And when he was designing D-Dust 2, he thought, well, shit, I've got to one up the most famous multiplayer map ever made. So he spent 15 minutes drawing on a piece of paper before getting to work, which is very fun bit of that was very much the Wild West. But you're not gonna get D-Dust out of TimeSplitters 1 map maker, but
no.
you will get a bit.
If you really like Facility from GoldenEye, you can make Facility from GoldenEye.
In 5 different aesthetic configurations.
Yeah, which is, quite nice. Again, it kind of... Because it's funny, because this game is called TimeSplitters, and they go through all the different time periods, but not to spoil the other two games, they never really mix the time periods together. It's only ever...
No, they're all isolated, and even in the map maker, you can't mix and match. You have to pick a tile set, which could be a RAM consideration. They can't have.
No, absolutely, but you can have the protagonists from the different time periods kind of meet up, and it's almost sort of kind of Quake free in that.
You can mix and match the weapon sets at least.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, you can do custom weapon sets and then have... Though this game doesn't have a terribly fascinating set of weapons yet.
No, not as much as...
They don't feel too distinct. Every era has a pistol, an assault rifle, an SMG, an explosive, and you're off to the races.
Yeah.
Shotgun. It's not the most imaginative yet. It's very aesthetic rather than functionality. And that goes with the character models as well, because TimeSplitters 1 doesn't have differing stats for each character. It's purely flavor.
Yeah. I will say as well, because we haven't... the aesthetics of TimeSplitters 1. The later games hold up a little bit better in this regard, but I still think that the fact that they aim for stylization in this has helped it age a little bit better than
It's one of those things where I think, because it's a cult studio and a cult series, if it was bigger... I think the TimeSplitters style would be remembered as an entity, because it's got a unique, cel-shaded but sort of realistically proportioned look, which I think is very charming, and it's quite long-lasting. But yeah, this one's rough. It hasn't quite nailed it yet. Characters are very splotchy and ugly and weird.
It almost feels like they're the low poly distance versions of the characters in TimeSplitters 2. really weird. But it is because again, like it kind of felt like we're not being restricted by having to do a film license or like something over. We can kind of do whatever we want, and so by aiming for this level of stylization, it almost kind of, and it also takes a little bit of the sting out of the violence. Which there's this really interesting interview with David Doak about like the history and sort of legacy of TimeSplitters, and his theory is that like Fortnite is kind of doing what we did at the time, but like is way more successful at it in regards to.
I can see that. Yeah, there is. I mean, obviously, I can't say influence because that'd be impossible to prove, but you can see it. Like, it's semi-realistic, cartoony with sort of realistic color palette. Like, it's not exaggerated cell shading.
And you have like hundreds of character skins where it isn't just humans. You also have like animal people and like robots and
my
stuff
favorite is a robot with like a fishbowl for a head. That's a lot of fun.
He feels like he feels like he would be a TimeSplitters character.
Or we'll see him in later games, Mr. Handy.
Oh yeah. God. Yeah, so it's just kind of funny in regards to like, if they did reboot TimeSplitters, would it be a thing of people like, oh, is this going to be like, are you going to charge us for like 1,000 skins of this kind of game?
It's a grim thing, but yeah, it could happen because they had limitless imagination. I mean, this first game, 64 characters to unlock, and again, not all of them super imaginative, but that is a lot to express yourself with, and pick what you want.
Yeah, and it's cool in regards to like,
and it all fucking blooms out in later games. It goes massive.
Oh god, yeah, and like even though they all kind of share the same like skeleton, they do squeeze quite a lot. They do quite a lot of interesting things with it, and not just in regards to like male-female parity is pretty constant throughout the series, which is interesting considering that like especially the later games kind of feel like, well, like I said, it's your overbrothered kind of lad style game, but they never get quite gratuitous with it. This game, absolutely not. It is just very much, it is what it is, which I quite like. But yeah, it's just, I guess, just to go back to the map maker a little bit, though.
I still had stuff to say about that, because I made a map.
Go ahead. Yeah, so you made a map.
Yeah, I sat down and was like, well, we're going to talk about Maker. I made a lot of maps in TimeSplitters 2, and we'll get to that. Mm-hmm. This one is functional, but very rough. The tile set you have to work with, you have 2 pages of tiles. I'd say you have about 30, 40 to choose from, and they're not a great selection.
It's quite limited.
It's not just that it's limited. You have all your basic, square blocks that fit together in a jigsaw-y way, and if you were just using them, you would make a very flat, boring, corridor-heavy map.
Yeah.
But the large ones you have, which are more varied in their construction and they join up in odd ways, the problem is that the pieces are either too boring or too chaotic, and there's no middle ground.
No.
So you look at the kind of square ones, and also picking them is awful because they're not well represented. You have to flick through until you get a nice 3D model of the one you want on a little side view. So navigating the menu is crap, and then I look at the pieces and I'm like, oh god, I can't make anything like a sensible level because I have to go from boring corridors to this nutso piece that has like a corner ramp which leads up into 2 more exits on a higher floor.
Yeah,
I can't work with any of this, and it's I found it interesting to work with, but I ran into a lot of frustrations with it. And the way connector pieces work is annoying because you either have red connectors, which are single tile on the edge of it, or you have green connectors, which are generally the whole side of a piece will connect to another piece.
Yeah.
But a red connector can't go into a green connector, which I didn't realize until I'd finished my map. And I could have previewed it a bit more, but this doesn't have a quick preview. You have to load in and out. And I was trying to see how quickly I could make a fun map. And so my map didn't actually come together. Like, it was meant to be one big central room and then a series of chaotic corridors leading up and down, which looped back around, and you could kind of, spin around the map that way. So it was a circular design with all the interesting weapons like being high risk in high traffic, high risk areas, or I thought would be. Obviously, I could only play with bots, but that's kind of the key thing, is that in 25 minutes, I threw together a map that was fun enough and the bots worked on it.
Yeah.
And I could deathmatch with them. And that's like, that probably tided a few people over for hours. That you could just sit down and before an episode of a TV show was over in a fucking half-hour slot, you have a map to play on, and the bots would let you play on it.
Absolutely. It's very much like, it's kind of like a Mario Maker thing in regards to, like, people on the PC had Unreal Editor and they were probably like, oh, I can do way more complex stuff. But you're there for hours setting stuff up versus here where it's almost kind of more Lego-y in regards to... You
Lego
have a couple
is the perfect way of putting it, is that you've got boundaries set upon you by the form of what you're working with, but that by necessity also guides creation.
Yeah, no, exactly. You have the thing of, like, maybe you might get inspired by something and try and recreate it as much as possible, but also the limitations of it kind of breed innovation in regards to, well, I can sort of mock what I want from these two pieces used in a really weird way. And, like, maybe you might test it out and go, oh, a tight corridor would work, like, really well here, or, oh, I should really put, like a power weapon right here. And you can just very quickly throw something together, which is, I think, I mean, the interface has problems in regards to it's very clunky, but just the idea of representing the map the same way that you would on, like, a piece of graphing paper, that's probably, like, the best way to, like, show that off. Again, they get better in regards to, you can pull a button and you see it in 3D, and it, like, helps you visualize it way more, but, like, just as a tool that somebody can play with, it is very... It's incredibly, like, straightforward, but sophisticated. It is, it's pretty... Within the 10 months that this game was thrown together, if they put, like, 80% of the development effort on it, I can sort of see that it paid off, because it is...
Yeah, it's got good replayability, and it's kind of a tragedy that, like, I played mostly TimeSplitters 2, so I can talk more about multiplayer when we get to that. For this one, I didn't, like, invite people and, like, hey, let's play TimeSplitters 1, and me and James didn't play together because parsec lag, what have you. Yeah. But it's, we are kind of necessarily missing out on a big piece of the puzzle in this episode, because, yeah, the single-player portion is a good 5 to 10 hours of fun, maybe more if you're, like, really into getting those times down, which, not for me personally, but
no,
the multiplayer there is just you've got 18 maps, potentially a lot more if you have a mate who's actually into the creation of maps. You got a few modes: the deathmatch, team deathmatch, capture the bag, bag tag, knockout, escort, last stand. Which I didn't play all of them. I fiddled about with the bots, and they are very easy, I would say, in this one. Like, especially on custom maps, it's amusing watching them trying to path their way through the custom maps, but they do fight. And I got knocked down a few times when they got their hands on a rocket launcher or something.
Yeah.
So there is a fight to it, but yeah, like, I can imagine this was, and especially coming out so early in the console's lifespan, fucking October 2000, November 2000, yeah. Like, this could have had people just sorted. Because you've just got play as much as you want, make more maps, play them, custom up the rule set. It's a little kind of make your own game tool in a little way.
It is funny because, like, I looked at reviews at the time and they were all very kind of, oh, well, we wish this was a bit more fleshed out, but hey, if you like GoldenEye, the multiplayer's good. But then, like a year afterwards, I tried to, like, scour the NeoGAF forums and stuff like that, like, where the gamers were. And yeah, most of them were still playing TimeSplitters. They were like, yeah, this multiplayer is, like, fantastic.
I mean, that's the thing of a game like this, is you just nail that core gameplay and then you give people the tools to expand that gameplay, and you get, I don't want to say, like, more than the sum of its parts, but it's that in a time sense. Like,
yeah,
it's that perfect little loop where you can hook people for ages with this because it's just fun and it gives you the tools to make your own fun. And even a seeming lack of content doesn't matter when that content is so perfectly geared towards this one thing.
Absolutely. And again, I think it talks to the sort of on a broader point to the Fortnite thing that Doug was saying, which is that even just in the fact that the multiplayer has 64 little characters in it, you're going to find one that you like, and it's kind of going to be this little bit of self-expression in regards to, well, when I play TimeSplitters, I'm inhabiting this character on this map that my friends played, and no one else is going to have that. Like, we are kind of creating our own little thing with this. Like, more so that in a game like, even like Halo 3, which had like Forge and stuff like that, even though that's like a way, well, I guess as a toolkit, it's kind of on the same scale, but because it's so locked down to Halo has to be Halo, like you only have Master Chief or the Singheli, and that's kind of it. You have to kind of play within that world. But with TimeSplitters, because of the concept of it can be any
It's very
time
modular.
period.
It's
Yeah.
very much you can build your own little fun, your own little sets out of this.
Yeah, it's really it is like really weirdly forward thinking for a game that was made in 10 months. So
it kind of does come from all this like thing of Perfect Dark and the will for creative freedom, and that births a series which has the perfect conceit to make a shooter where you make your own fun, and what's there is fun, what you make is fun, and yeah, that's just great replayability. And even aside from the Fortnite thing, I can't think of a game that really provides that aspect.
no, like I guess you could
Fortnite,
argue that,
even in its Fortnite does that, but it monetizes it, and it kind of locks you off from that content, and you have to earn it, and you can't personalize the experience truly to yourself.
no, and like
This has a lot more of it.
Roblox is the same in regards to you either have to spend money or you have to kind of learn programming to get to that. It was always the same with kind of like stuff like Second Life and these kind of sandboxy style MMO chat rooms where to get the most out of it, it was like the level of maybe VR chat might be near that.
Until very recently, that game is going to be locked down either very soon or already has been.
Oh no.
Yeah, there was some legal things, so the VR chat community, or at least the people heavily into modding, are migrating, apparently.
Okay, so whatever those people migrate to, that is the nearest thing I guess we have today to like a TimeSplitters. Even though it doesn't have shooting, it has standing around, and sometimes somebody's programmed like a car or whatever. Which...
Yeah, there'll be some anime around, which this game, TimeSplitters is very light on the anime.
No, which is funny considering that it does have some cyberpunk sections. Like, even the second one has like a level which is full-on cyberpunk, but not very anime. It's more kind of like Jet Set Radio tone-wise than it is like, Ghost in the Shell. But weird though, because Joanna Dart, they would eventually reboot it into an anime-looking character for Perfect Dark Zero. So,
I don't know if is Perfect Dark Zero coming up on the podcast, or am I free to talk? Just get it out.
If you want to talk a little bit about Perfect Dark Zero now, you can. I wouldn't mind doing it on the podcast at some point.
Okay, well, I'll keep it light then, because yeah, that was a game I played. That was, funnily enough, just talking about launch titles. That was a 360 launch title, and me and that same friend James, we played a lot of Perfect Dark Zero. That one hooked us. Not in the same way, but in a similar way, and especially it had multiplayer and bot support. Support, when that started dying out as a trend, was such a big loss to shooters. Even though we had Xbox Live at that point, we would split screen online, which was a lovely little innovation that was great in the 360 days. Very rigid shooting, doesn't play like a Perfect Dark game, doesn't play like TimeSplitters, doesn't play like GoldenEye. It's a lot more rigid, a lot more locked down, and I do think looking back, that game did get rightfully called a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, but
yeah,
I don't know. It was just one of those things that it was a very good tide you over game until that console was really in its
until
the other games had come out. It was better than fucking Quake 4, I'll say that.
Oh god, yeah, fucking
yeah.
Fucking Quake 4. Oh, dear.
It was genuinely a game we could pop on. We'd put all the bots on one team, us on the other, and we'd like try and do survivals against these bots.
So it's funny because one little thing I'll say, and then I guess we'll get into sort of our final thoughts on TimeSplitters. But two recent games that I played that kind of got me to because I think bots were one of those things that I always kind of took for granted. Mostly because it was like, well, if I'm going to play multiplayer, I'm playing with my friends, so like, whatever, like it doesn't really matter. But then doing the podcast kind of built my appreciation for bots in regards to, this is like a perfect legacy feature because I'm not going to be able to play these multiplayer games. Those servers are long gone, but the bots are still here, so I can kind of...
So this game will exist forever.
So I can get a facsimile of what this multiplayer was like. But two games that kind of got me to sort of reappreciate more was... one that a lot of people recommended for the podcast, which we will probably do at some point, which is Medal of Honor Airborne. Which doesn't have bots per se.
But it does have an arena-like design.
Yeah, the way that the game is structured feels very arena-y and very kind of like, it's not just you on your own. You're also surrounded... It feels like you're part of like a really big team deathmatch game, which I guess, thinking about it, World War II was the biggest team deathmatch game in human history. So.
Yeah, let's go with that. Let's go with... biggest game of team deathmatch there ever was.
Put that on the books. And then the other game, and I've mostly just been replaying it just because I fancy it, like Titanfall 2. And it feels like Titanfall was the last hurrah in regards to our multiplayer is built around bots to the extent that they had to leverage Microsoft Cloud technology to power the bots' AI.
That does kind of maybe undercut what could be a longevity feature if when the cloud is no longer supporting them and the bots are brain dead. That's a weirdly tragic grey area.
It is like such a shame with that game because like the whole point was that we've maxed out the processing everywhere else and like this is a nice buy-in for like the Xbox One of you're not going to get this cloud software anywhere else, but yeah, it is such a shame because, again, Titanfall and especially Titanfall 2 do kind of manage that feeling of like a big battle, but within the lore of, well, you have regular soldiers, but then you're a pilot. You're almost... It's almost like the thing that you would want Overwatch to do, where you actually feel like a superhero surrounded by like other soldiers, which makes you feel more impressive, which... You're not going to get that in any other... Like, if you had, like, just a... Well, I mean, Overwatch, you feel like a jobber like everybody else because it's a team game.
Yeah, it's 5v5, 6v6, or whatever, and it's... You don't have... I like, that's the thing, actually, that I think has died recently when... Because... Alright, this is going to be me doing some boomer talk. I think the focus on... games being competitive and balanced has killed a lot of creativity in the same way them figuring out good controller schemes killed configuration, because before they worked out configuration they handed it to the player to go nuts with. Before there was a big focus on this game might need a comp scene, games would go crazy with experimentation, and that's why there were so many madcap modes in this. And I just want to bring up, because I'll never have the chance to talk about this elsewhere, I don't think, unless I just force myself to make a video on it. State of Emergency on the Xbox. Yeah, this is a fucking shift. Another cel-shaded game. Has one of my favourite multiplayer modes that I have not seen done anywhere else, because it has like deathmatch, but it has a riot mode deathmatch where the map is filled with like civilians going crazy and like looting shops and running around and getting into fights. Like that is a game of just chaos. But it has this riot mode where you can run up and hit a button and that civilian will be added to your team.
Oh, neat.
So as you're running around, like me and a mate played this a bunch because State of Emergency is a crap game, but this is an amazing multiplayer mode that you run around and you're just trying to recruit because you end with this massive like tens of people large brawl when you eventually run into each other. It's the thing that it's like being on the ground level in a really bad real-time strategy game.
Well, I was gonna say it almost sounds like a mixture between like Gang Beasts and Pikmin. That's such a...
Yeah, it's mental, and it's like it's a bad game, but it's just the perfect execution of they looked at this game, they thought we need to throw a multiplayer mode into this garbage, and then they just kind of hooked onto immediately the fucking chaos.
Why don't we do fighting game RTS we just end up there by happenstance. God, and I love that because you have the whole StarCraft thing of do you just hang about and build up units, or do you go in for like quick rushes and
Yeah, and like you're also looking for weapons, and you're trying to think where's the biggest pocket of like civilians, and you're just hoping to get lucky on that.
yeah.
It's
God,
it's
I
crazy,
really
and
love
I've never seen another game like do that. It's such a fun multiplayer mode.
God, such a shame that it's not an FPS game and thus cannot qualify.
It can't qualify. It is a shooter, but only some of the time.
Maybe...
It's not worth covering.
No, I was gonna.
It's not worth covering.
Unless
you want to make a big political point about it, which
No.
I don't know if there is much to claw. Despite
I was going to say, is the big political point that the guy on the front kind of looks a bit like Ali G, I guess. The only
I
other thing
mean, I think it's that a corporation runs everything, so it's kind of loosely about how privatization is bad.
Damn.
That's where
I
the
also
riot's
know
coming
that
from.
isn't that like the game that came out immediately after GTA 3 and was like
Yeah.
Rockstar? Oh, it's got to be a fucking another banger from Rockstar.
It ain't a banger. It ain't a banger. Though I enjoyed it as a kid because
Okay.
chaos. So, but it's hard as balls and doesn't control terribly well.
What would you say as a child you enjoyed State of Emergency or Time Splitters more? But you didn't play Time Splitters 1 until after the fact, so actually I don't know if that
I mean,
question applies.
I was hoping you wouldn't say more. I was hoping that would be a binary. You liked one or you liked the other, chump. This is a false dichotomy.
that wasn't a rhetorical question. That was a genuine...
Well, I mean, I guess I liked State of Emergency more just on the basis that I hadn't played much Time Splitters 1. If it was Time Splitters 2, then this would be no competition. Time Splitters 2 would be kicking State of Emergency to the curb, but...
I will make sure to put in the docket to ask that question again when we get
and
to
the guest, whoever that may be.
Yeah, very true.
I hope the guest... There are certain stories you brought up that I'm hoping the guest will bring up as well, and we don't interrupt them.
I will... Yeah, I'll try my best to... This was an episode. This was an experiment in not interrupting too much. I didn't want to.
I think you're fine. You're the one who's got the knowledge, so best I just let you talk.
Speaking of having the knowledge, I got good news and bad news for you.
Oh no!
So the good news is, we already did the chart for the year 2000 when we covered Soldier of Fortune, and we also can't do the top-rated Metacritic games of the year because we did that when we did Star Trek Elite Forces, which also came out in the year 2000. So good news for you, we're not doing the game chart quiz.
That's bad news. I enjoyed the quiz, but yeah, I'm only one person, so it wouldn't be much point.
Well, let me
flip
flip
be
that
an
around.
Exercise.
Okay, well, let me flip that around then. That was the bad news. The good news is I've come up with a new quiz. Specifically for this, maybe for this mini-series, or just maybe for the episodes where it applies.
How many hints am I going to need?
Well, we're going to do the Time Splitters quiz. So obviously this is a game about time travel and it has multiple different characters in it. I'm going to tell you a character and the level that they're in, and then I'm going to give you a multiple choice. You need to tell me what year the level takes place in.
Oh, that's... Okay. All right.
Okay, I'm going to get the one out of the way that you already knew, which was Chastity Detroit, Cyber Den.
Yeah, 2005.
2005, there you go. The point sound came in at that point.
Ding, ding.
Ding. Okay, next one. Captain Ash, Lost Temple of Thochek. Do you want the multiple choice, or do you want to try and take a guess?
Let me try one, and then we'll do the multiple choice.
Okay.
1890?
No, that is incorrect. So here's
okay,
your multiple.
Hit me with
Here's
the
your multiple
multiples. I'll be here
choices.
for hours otherwise.
Was it 1910, 1920, or 1930?
I'm going to go 1920.
1920 is correct. Next one, Sebastian Photon, Planet X. Did it take place in 2020, 3030, or 4040?
2020.
Yes, you got that
Yeah.
one as well. Because I was when you brought that up earlier. Well, you didn't bring up 20. You brought up
I did bring up
earlier.
explicitly, but the comedic closeness of all the...
And I almost said, actually, that's really funny because Planet X takes place in 2020, and
you did say 2020 is your first guess for Cyberden, so
I did as well.
You've snookered yourself. It's funny as well because the future segments in later games moves the timeline to 2400, which is... So it's really a gag kind of exclusive to this first game, but it's like, actually, maybe that's a bit too ridiculous. 2400, that's when Sergeant Cortez is knocking about, and he's the main character of the series, not in this game. The protagonist of the series is not in the first game, which is amazing.
When you think about it, the Time Splitters are the real characters of the series.
I suppose, yeah, they're kind of like an enemy thing, but Harry Tipper is in all three games. There's only, in a pool of over 100 characters, there are only 15 which are in all three games.
Speaking of Harry Tipper, Chinese restaurant, was it 1960?
It's 1970. Yeah, I know that one.
And finally, Fingers Mackenzie chemical plant. Is it 1984, 1985, or 1986?
1985.
It's 1985, yeah.
That
Congratulations.
one was the guess. That was the hardest one.
Well, there we go. I made it the hardest one because I just gave it intervals of years rather than decades.
Yeah.
Congratulations. I think you're the only person so far who's gotten a quiz all the way right. So
I'm so clever at the most inane subjects.
It's not that, well, I don't know. It might come up if you ever do like a Time Splitters pub quiz or something.
Okay, I've got a crap quiz.
Oh wait, you've invented a quiz. God damn it. All right, here we go. I've never been quizzed before on this, I think.
Actually, how do I even frame this? This is a crap one. So, question 1. I guess we'll do 3.
Okay.
Which one of these characters is in all 3 games?
Okay.
So, Angel Perez, Chinese Chef, and Beetle Man.
I think it's Angel Perez, but I was going to say that Chinese Chef is in... Technically, the Chinese restaurant level is in every single Time Splitters game.
So what's your answer?
Oh, I guess Chinese Chef then.
Yep, bang, Chinese Chef.
Yeah,
Of
there
all
you go.
characters there. He's the one that survives all 3 games. He can't be thrown out of the pot.
You can't stop cooking.
Can't stop cooking.
All right.
Okay. Duckman Drake, Bear, Calamari.
I think Duckman Drake.
It's another one. Another bang on.
Oh, nice. Yes, boys.
Okay. Now, lastly. Robofish, Booty Guard, Captain Snow.
I'm going to say Booty Guard.
First slip up, Robofish.
Ah, dang it. And we were talking about Robofish earlier.
Yeah. One of me faves.
Dang it. Well, I because I lost the quiz, Snake. Technically, I guess you're the new you're the new host of Bullet Time.
Not a terrible quiz for a terrible gimmick for up on the spot.
I guess so, but that's how it. I mean, it doesn't matter how you're defeated in combat. It just matters if you're defeated or not. So
yeah.
I guess then, in order to crown you, thank you very much for coming on this episode. I mean, you'll be on other episodes as well, but this was more of a, I don't know, you were like a host, but you were also like a guest.
I don't know, a ghost?
A ghost, yeah, you were like a ghost.
A guest host?
Guess, is there, the ghost host goes with the most.
I'm one in the chamber. I'm a semi-consistent person here at Bullet Time.
Yeah. Exactly. Is there anything you would like to pitch or promote or just hype up while you're here?
Goodness, I've got nothing on my brain at the moment, besides the fact I'm working on the game Hooligans. I guess I do. I'm going to shout out a total... This is going to be very weird.
Okay.
I'm going to mess up the name, but there's the... So... the strangest damn thing I learned about in just today. I was going through the credits of the game Hooligans, which has an FMV, what the director of the game called a fuckumentary. Because he didn't know the term mockumentary, I guess. Because it was it's like a documentary, but it's fake. I call it a fuckumentary. And he got his mates to kind of appear in it. And one of the characters is Bolch, who is basically like football hooligan Lenny, like a big fat guy who's like very simple and can't talk.
Right.
Like he only has a few lines like, you know, they tried to steal Fluffy Animal. No one touches Fluffy Animal. God. And I was going through the credits, and he was played by a guy called Eric Creer.
Okay.
And I look up, and he is a decently famous now Dutch comic book artist. And I literally emailed him today. I was like, hey, I'm sorry for the weird question. Did you play Bolch in the game Football, like Hooligan Storm Over Europe? And he was like, yeah, that's me. Like, a friend asked me to appear in it. I've never actually watched the game. And I was like, oh, thanks. If you're still in contact with that friend, could you tell him thanks? Could you tell him
That's good.
I had a weird experience with that game?
So shouts out to Eric Creer then, I guess.
Shout out to Eric Creer of Gutsman Enterprises, established 1991. So he was doing it before Hooligans, but I looked at his website, and I don't know the guy personally, but his comic art is very nice.
That's good.
And I feel like if I should shout at anyone just for the weird confluence of things that happened today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
dues.
there we go. A bit of a random shout out, and that's what I'll go with.
Nice. As always, I've been James. You can follow me on Twitter over at Hotcider, HOTCYDER. You asked what guest is coming off for the next episode of Bullet Time when we talk about TimeSplitters 2, the game that I had to keep stopping myself talking about in relation to this game, because this is too damn good. We'll be joined by video maker Mr. Hammers to talk about this 2002 release. So hope you join us for that. But until next time, folks, keep blasting.
Keep blasting.
The Bullet Time podcast is made possible by Eric Hamilton Schneider, Valerie B, VG, and the Hot Cider support tier. If you'd like to help with the production of episodes and gain access to extra content, consider supporting over at patreon.com/Hot Cider. That's HOTCYDER. A special thanks to Max Coburn for the Bullet Time theme tune.